Pressure on the Pusan bridgehead led General Bradley, chief of the American Chiefs of Staff, to say, "We'd like anything. If you send a platoon today, it'll be worth a battalion tomorrow." So the British Army was under pressure to send some forces. They said, "Very well, we will send the British 29th Brigade, which is the Imperial Strategic Reserve." And they began to get them together, which meant calling up reservists and possibly extending national servicemen. And then they said, "How long will they take?" This was in August. "Oh," they said, "we think they'll be ready by November." Well, an exclamation mark was the response to that in Washington.
Britain had troops in the Far East. Some were tied down fighting the insurgency in Malaya, but there were others in Hong Kong. Hoping China would not attack its colony, Britain sent these units to Korea at the end of August.
On 29 August, the British aircraft carrier Unicorn moves into Pusan Harbor. On deck are British troops bound for the Korean battlefront. Within a week, they are rushed to fight alongside 1st Cavalry troops east of Waiguan to help stop a threatened breakthrough along the Naktong River. These troops are the first infantrymen of a foreign nation to join in the United Nations police action. They are members of the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, composed largely of Scotsmen and the Middlesex Regiment, most of whom hail from the London area. Almost all of these Britishers have served in Hong Kong for 6 months, where they underwent rigorous training in hilly country very similar to that of Korea. Except for the 3.5 bazooka and U.S.-supplied rations, these Britishers will use their own weapons and supplies. Their uniforms are jungle green, with only the regimental pipers wearing the kilts, which won the Scots the nickname the Ladies from Hell.
Of course, all eyes were on the Argylls, as they always are and always will be, with the Scotsmen in kilts in a far country. And so they got all the bouquets and everything else. It was a fascinating sight, very unmilitary. And lots of odd American soldiers walking about or lying about. Don't know what they were supposed to be doing, but they were all very vociferous and vocal about how we'd arrived too late. It was incredible. It wasn't a kind of war picture that we British are used to. It was something out of, well, I don't know, cinema.
Hi guys, so you've just heard from that intro. Today we're going to be looking at the first British troops to arrive in Korea, 27th Brigade, which consisted of the Middlesex, 1st Battalion Middlesex and 1st Battalion Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders. The footage you've just seen shows them arriving in Busan. What I have here is the field uniform, the uniform they would have worn in the field after arriving, and we'll go through the various components of it.
The aim of this video is to give an overview of one man's kit in the field, as opposed to looking at individual items in as much detail as I do in the other videos. The uniform worn here represents that worn in the summer of 1950. It had been issued for service in Hong Kong, and the uniform thus consists of clothing suitable for the hot climate there. It was quite suitable for the summer in Korea as well. The basic uniform consists of a jungle green Airtex bush jacket and jungle green drill trousers made to an early post-war pattern introduced in 1947. It was also common to see the World War II vintage Indian-made jungle green bush jacket and trousers in use at this time. The uniform is topped by a 1945 dated jungle hat, which often replaced regimental headdress in the field. The web equipment is 1937 pattern, worn in battle order with the haversack on the back. The two basic pouches at the front contain 2 Bren gun magazines each, as the infantryman represented here is the number 1 on a Bren gun. On the back of the webbing, the entrenching tool is carried in its cover. The helve is of the pattern which had an attachment for the spike bayonet, which was introduced late in World War II and seemed in common use post-war. On the right hip, the enamel water bottle is carried in a full-length sleeve carrier, which seems to have been the predominant type used by and then with 27th Brigade. A spike bayonet would normally be carried in its frog on the left hip, if armed with a number 4 rifle, but as this setup represents a Bren gunner, this is dispensed with. Moving down the uniform, we come to the footwear, which is the standard British hobnail boot, worn with the standard webbing gaiters. In terms of underwear, we have a pair of the standard issue grey wool socks. In terms of drawers, it is difficult to say for certain what was issued, but it seems obvious something suitable for hot weather would have been issued, so I have included a pair of 1945 dated white Airtex drawers. Next we will consider the haversack contents. I've not been able to find any photos showing the specific small kit carried by men of 27th Brigade, so I've based this on photos of kit issued elsewhere in the late 40s, early 50s. The immediate post-war years were a rather austere time for Britain, so much of the kit is the same as that issued in World War II. First we have the jersey, which is one of the more newly introduced items included. It's the jungle green example associated with the 1944 pattern equipment, this particular example being dated 1945. Another item of warm clothing is the ubiquitous woolen cap comforter, which was often seen worn by men of the brigade in the winter months, which we'll get to in a minute. Then we have personal hygiene items in the form of a tin of foot powder, a white cotton towel, and a 1945 dated aluminium soap tin, again associated with the 1944 pattern equipment, and it contains a bar of coal tar soap. In addition to this, there are shaving accoutrements carried in the soldier's hold-all, including a razor, shaving brush, both dated 1945, and a stick of shaving soap. Alongside these we have a comb, a tube of toothpaste and toothbrush, and finally spare boot laces. To care for the boots, brushes are carried along with a tin of black polish. Next we have a spare pair of grey wool socks. A hussif is also carried, essentially a small sewing kit, which allowed soldiers to repair their uniforms and reattach buttons if needed. And finally, a pair of 1945 dated aluminium mess tins with a knife, fork and spoon set. In addition to the items carried in the haversack, soldiers often carried some small items in the pockets of the uniform, and I've included here some representative examples. We have cigarettes and chocolate from the American rations 27th Brigade were provided with, and 1945 dated British issue clasp knife. And by way of completeness, we have the first field dressing, which was carried in the dressing pocket on the trousers. Now we're going to take a look at the uniform that was worn in the winter of 1950-51 by 27th Brigade. They acquired American cold weather uniform items, including M43 combat clothing. The American M1943 combat jacket is being worn along with the associated trousers. Underneath this is worn an American 5-button sweater and an American issue wool shirt. This is the one being worn is the special design introduced for use in World War II, which included gas flap and flaps at the wrists. In terms of headgear, the cap comforter is being worn rather than being carried in a haversack, and wool gloves are being worn, British issue brown wool gloves, and hung round the neck are a pair of outer mitts, which are 1942 dated Second World War examples. Photographs show that these were worn along with the British issue wool gloves, suggesting that some smaller items of British cold weather clothing were provided to 27th Brigade to wear with the American uniform. The boots are still the standard British Army ammunition boots and the webbing gaiters. The web equipment is largely unchanged, save for an additional item or an additional load being carried, which is the British Army British issue 1944 pattern poncho with a wool blanket as a sort of extemporised bedroll, which is being carried on the back of the belt using the supporting straps from the pack, and the entrenching tool has thus been moved to the left hip to make room for this. The underwear is the same, British issue items shown before, and the contents of the haversack remain unchanged, though obviously the cap comforter is now being worn rather than being carried in the haversack. So there we are, that's the winter uniform, what 27th Brigade typically wore in the winter months. Not everyone was provided with the mitts, it seems, and obviously some items, the American issue pile liner was also seen being worn, as well as the 5-button sweater and various other items from the American infantry. But this is a typical example. This is sort of an average taken from various photographs of what the men were wearing and carrying. So as usual, I hope you found that interesting. A happy new year to all of you, and until next time, bye for now.